Go ahead and get started. All righty. Very good. Very good. Hello, everyone, again, and welcome to those new people who have not been to a session before, and to those of you who are returning. We very much appreciate you being with us today, and thank you for sharing your afternoon with us again. We're excited to be able to be in our fifth session. It's the fifth session of our fall series, and we have Dr. Sara Qualls in joining us. I will introduce her later and tell you about her program. My name is Pamela, and I represent the Area Agency on Aging. And we also have Jessica McMullen, who is behind the scenes, making sure that the webinar runs smoothly today. The Area Agency on Aging, as probably most of you know, is one of 16 in the state of Colorado. And our whole mission and goal is to help with quality of life and independence of older adults. In particular, our Area Agency on Aging specializes in senior information and assistance and resources for the community, as well as we are pleased to be able to house the SHIP office. That's SHIP. It stands for the State Health Insurance Program, where we provide Medicare insurance counseling to beneficiaries in actually a 9-county area. This year, I think you probably also know we've expanded to 5 sessions instead of 4. And there are handouts usually with each one of the presentations. They are online at ppacg.org/aging, where you can access them. Some of these handouts would not be possible if we did not have the help and the assistance through the Colorado Bar Association, the Area Agencies on Aging for the state of Colorado, and the SHIP office that I mentioned to you before. So a little bit about housekeeping. Please mute your microphones. And if you would put your questions in the chat, and we will save the questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll review any items at that time. So it's at this time, I would like to introduce Blake Kennedy, who is a business development specialist with End Credit Union. And I neglected to say at the beginning of this presentation is that we are doing this with the cooperation and the collaboration of End Credit Union. And we've been doing this 7 years with them, which I mentioned previously. They would not be a success if we did not have their involvement and their enthusiasm and their participation in this program. So Blake will tell you about End Credit Union and tell you about the survey and the door prize. Thank you for being with us, Blake.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Pamela, I'll probably have you fill them in a little bit on the door prize and things like that.
Okay, that's fine.
But I would like to introduce myself and to all of you. As Pamela has so graciously introduced myself, I am Blake Kennedy with End Credit Union. I have been with the credit union for about 3 years now. But really, I'd like to tell you about Ent. We were initially founded in 1957 down in Colorado Springs, over where the Olympic Training Center used to be Ent Air Force Base, which is where we were founded. We have since actually emerged as Colorado's largest credit union in the most recent years. And we have about $7.5 billion in assets. We serve about 400,000 members in more than 40 convenience service centers located up and down the Front Range here in Colorado. Aside from that, we are here to serve our members first, and we are member owned. So yeah, thank you for being here today as we go on our fifth series for finding meaning and purpose in retirement.
All right. Thank you, Blake. Appreciate it. You all will be getting a survey, probably not after our session today, but tomorrow morning. And End Credit Union has so graciously offered, they are doing a door prize for each one of our sessions. And if you do the survey and leave your email address with that survey, you'll be entered into the door prize, which will be a $50 gift card for, it's at, I believe, I can't remember where it's at. But anyway, it'll be a $50 gift card, and you can be entered into that drawing. So please feel free. Also, the survey, please give us your critique and your comments about today's presentation. All of that being said, I would like to introduce our main speaker for today, who is Dr. Sara Qualls. She specializes and is recognized nationally in the field of clinical geropsychology. In addition to the gerontology, she has also published widely on mental health and aging and caregiver interventions. One of her many books actually is on aging and mental health. At UCCS, she co-founded the training, clinical and doctoral program in clinical psychology that does indeed focus on gerontology. Dr. Qualls is the Kraemer Family Professor of Aging Studies and Professor of Psychology at UCCS. Please join me in giving Dr. Qualls a very warm welcome as we delve into meaning and purpose in retirement. Thank you, Dr. Qualls.
Thank you. And thank you, Pamela, and all of the Air Agency on Aging for doing this series. The attendance that occurs every few months when you offer this series lets us know these are issues of interest to many of us. And when I tell you that this is year 38 for me at UCCS, it will become clear that this is an issue for me as well, because I have to be getting close to retirement, and I am. And so that's an important consideration, because this is relevant to me even as it's relevant to all of you. So I'm going to begin to start sharing my screen here, and we're going to start the process of going through the material I want to share. And let me just check in. Pamela, Jessica, is everything coming through okay with sound and visual?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Okay. So a tremendous amount of retirement planning ends up focusing on finances. And well, it should. We know that in general, people have not saved enough and are quite surprised to find how their financial structure will work in later life. So there's a lot to think about and a lot of decisions to make about how you're going to take Social Security and how you're going to take Medicare, et cetera. One of the things that gets talked about probably least is the issue of what are you going to do? How are you and I going to find meaning and purpose in retirement? So what makes that so important is that we now in the US have quite a long expected retirement period. So if you retire at, for example, age 65, men can expect on average 18 years of retirement after that, and women a little over 20 years. Now, those averages don't tell the story of all the variability that we experience in any kind of actuarial table. Some of us have better health, some of us have better genes, some of us have better lifestyles behind us or ahead of us, and those will affect those numbers. But if you really think about the fact that for most of us, we expect to retire with at least a decade and a half or 2 or 3 ahead of us, it really does help us kind of put some perspective on the expectation that we might want to be thinking about what we're going to actually do. Now, in that period of retirement, of course, we're also going to be aging, because aging does seem to be the only way to live a long life. We're going to have that experience, which comes with a variety of what we call biopsychosocial changes, biological changes, psychological changes, and social changes. Most of us are going to live the majority of that post-retirement period with reasonable health. Typically, across the country, when gerontologists and geriatricians talk about what to expect in retirement, they kind of talk about third age and fourth age. Third age being sort of the younger period when our aging is not doesn't provoke as much change in our physical existence. But at some point, often by the mid 80s, we start to experience some changes in our health and our bodies that happen because of the accumulation of chronic disease that are going to change the way we are in the world. Doesn't mean we have no meaning, doesn't mean we have no purpose, but it changes the way we are in the world. So we need to think about meaning and purpose. So I'm going to pose for you today some questions, and this is kind of a workshop format. My intention is to raise some questions with you, to get you thinking, and give you something to go away and do some work on. There are no right and wrong answers about meaning and purpose at any phase of the lifespan, including retirement. The best we can do is to raise the questions and bring ourselves back to those questions over and over again. So here are the ones we're going to deal with today. Well, first, let's think about what are the components of our life, i.e. the ones that will all change as we retire and as we age. What makes up my identity in particular? What relationships do I have? Which ones do I value? What do I need? How might those change in retirement? What gives me meaning and purpose? And how do I maintain my health? So we're going to work our way through those. And I'm going to start with, what are the components of your life? Now, a philosopher, philanthropist named Arthur Morgan said, preparation for old age should not begin later than one's teens. A life which is empty of purpose until 65 will not suddenly become filled on retirement. And that seems very obvious when we say that. I fear that some of the people who struggle with retirement, who are clearly the minority of people, but the people who struggle in retirement are people who let life be structured for them, perhaps without a lot of reflection on what was meaningful and purposeful prior to 65. And so they are just sort of focused in a beeline way of getting free of work without really thinking about free to do what. So I'm going to invite you to take a look at some images that I'm going to put on the screen. The first set of images is about relationships. And I'm going to invite you to think about, what are the relationships in your life? We're going to spend a little more time on this in a moment. What are the relationships that give you meaning and purpose prior to retirement? And what is it that you might want to do with those as you move through retirement? Another component of your life may be the arts or spirituality. What gives you, what are your creative juices that we associate with the arts, whether it's music or visual art or some other component of movement art, etc. And what about spirituality? How has that been evident in your life prior to retirement? And how do you anticipate it shifting, changing, emerging, being shaped by retirement? And I mean spirituality in a very broad sense here, not necessarily institutional religious participation, although it could be that, but it could also be other ways that you experience the spiritual side of life or the meaning side of life. And then I would invite you to think a little bit about the components of your life that relate to health, physical wellness, physical well-being, and how you've related to those prior to now and how that might shift as you move into retirement. And a last component I'm going to invite us to mull on a little bit in a few minutes is thinking, ideas, important thoughts or thought patterns that we care about, activities, whether it's reading or plays or sports or travel, whatever that be. How does that fit into your life? So thinking of those different components, and one could certainly address others, but that's one set. You might ask the question of what's been important over time. And that would lead me to think about sort of a schematic of what was happening in different phases of your life. So this is a little worksheet, and I assume that the worksheets have gone out to the participants, and if they haven't, they will. Pamela, Jessica, do you know if they've already gone out?
No, I don't believe they went out, Sarah.
Okay, so you all can make this up if you want, or they can send them after the presentation. But if you think about the decades of your life, just sort of big picture, 10-year blocks, and they may not have, your life patterns may not have shifted on the decade milestone of 30, 40, 50, 60. But if you think about the decades of your life, think a little bit about what were the important events that were going on in those different decades. In your 30s, what were you doing? For many of us, we were establishing a work pattern. We were establishing important relationships, perhaps deciding whether we want to have children or having children. Perhaps we were caring for relatives who needed assistance, maybe a sibling with developmental disabilities, or maybe someone else that had needs, grandparents. And in your 40s and in your 50s, what were you doing exactly? Because the important events that shaped us coming to this moment are part of our narrative, if you will. And we can think about how we gave meaning and purpose to those events. So at some point in my late 20s, I took a job at UCCS. What was the meaning and purpose associated with that? And at some point in my 30s, I added children to my family. What were some of the meanings and purposes in that? Your trajectory may be different, but you can still ask that question. What gave my life meaning or richness in that phase? Because that's really foundational to you looking ahead. It's certainly the case that for some of us, we look forward to some big shifts in retirement, perhaps in where we live or what we do, or how much time we spend in one space. On the other hand, many of us can anticipate that the richness, the meaning, will have more continuity even than the structures might have. So if you list the domains of your life, what are the meaningful parts of your life? So I gave you some images: relationships, arts and culture, spirituality, maybe religiosity, physical wellness or well-being, activities. If you were going to just jot down right now some important domains in your life, I would invite you to do that. What's important to you out of those? Just think for a minute about that. If you're like most people, those domains have not stayed perfectly stable over time. The salience or importance of that domain, let's say relationships, let's say marriage or children or siblings. For most of us, the importance of that, whoever's in that domain, has varied over time. We know in most families, sibling relationships during the busy 20s, 30s, 40s years can drift apart a bit. And many people find renewed meaning in sibling relationships in their 60s and 70s. Not everyone, but many people. On the other hand, for some people, marriages were highly salient early in adulthood and may have dissolved in middle adulthood and took on maybe were replaced, maybe weren't replaced. And so maybe marital relationship or partnership took a backseat at some point. So paying attention to how domains like relationships, arts and culture, whatever those ones that you listed were, how have those shifted over time in importance? And then also, how have they shifted over time in satisfaction? So you could make a little graph that says, if you looked at one of the domains of your life, you could say, well, it started out at a pretty good level and then it took a dip and then it rose. This is a not uncommon pattern related to marital satisfaction, for example, that during the busiest phases of life, many people report a reduction in marital satisfaction, even though they're getting good life satisfaction. It's just a hard time when one has a lot of responsibilities to extract from marriage all the joys that you had when you had fewer responsibilities, or lying ahead when you get to have fewer of them. So you could map this in terms of arts. You might have started out being a painter, and because your career and your family obligations or community obligations took over a lot of your time and energy, you just quit being able to do that very much. And so it kind of took a back seat. You didn't get much satisfaction out of it. And then you began to build it back in. Maybe it's physical activity. It could be any of those things. So this is the basic concept. What are the important components? How have they varied over time? And how do I extract richness and meaning from them? So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different components, more specifically. So let's talk about relationships a little bit. And I put in this collage a lot of different kinds of relationships. There are all different kinds: friendships, competitive relationships on the tennis court, family relationships across generations or within generations, pet relationships, all kinds. So let's think for a minute about who is in our lives. Well, here's a list of some categories of people. You may have some of them and not have all of them. For example, in family, some of you have a nuclear family. You have a spouse and siblings and children and parents. Others of you have extended family that's important to you, that exists, first of all, and is important to you. Whereas other people, like people who are only children, may not have much extended family at all if they were the only child of an only child, for example. Close friends, the people you really count on, the ones that are on your list to be called if you get really sick and land in the hospital, for example. Or neighbors, or coworkers, or members of organizations you belong to, country clubs, or service organizations, or churches, or synagogues. You may have geographically distant friends who are important to you. People that, we have many people in this community who were in the military and formed very close relationships at certain points in adulthood that they sustained with some people over time. I have that from graduate school. That was such a potent time in my life. I've kept some very close friendships from that time. You may have a large set or a small set of acquaintances, depending on your personality. You know, extroverts want a lot of people on this list, and introverts don't want so many people on the list. They just want them to matter. The number isn't magic. You can drop below a number. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, let's just think about who is in your life. And you could sit and do a reflection, and I would encourage you to do so, to just do a little journaling, jot a list. Who's in your life? Who's been in your life that was important? Who's in your life now? But then you could sort of think of these people that are all of these different people as being sort of a member of your convoy. So some colleagues of ours in the field of gerontology in the late 70s and early 80s started using this term of a social convoy about the time you probably remember the truckers used to form convoys, and they still do actually, but it was more of a sort of a phenomenon that got written into songs, as I recall. They adapted that trucker convoy notion to our social convoy through the lifespan. That when we're 18 or 19 or 16, we begin to build our convoy for life, and we add to that convoy for a long time. There comes a time when some people drop out of that convoy by our choice or not. But one of the characteristics of that convoy is closeness as a variable that varies, in fact, across those relationships. So I want you to take a moment and jot on your little note paper there, what are the names of some people you consider in the most inner circle of your convoy? Who are those people? Jot it down for yourself. And who's in the next circle? Not your closest, but good, close people, important people in your life. And then I'm going to ask you to kind of go to the third circle. Who's in that third circle of closeness? They're not your most intimate. They're not the middle. There's an outer circle. And you can start that list now, but you may want to come back to it and do, again, some reflection on that. Because we're asking the question of meaning and purpose in retirement. And part of where I'm going with this is to think about how relationships fit in there. So who's in your convoy? Who are the people? And what do they bring into your convoy? Because all relationships are not alike. I happen to be a pet owner. I own a dog and a cat. And let me just tell you that I get very different things from my dog and cat. I also happen to have 3 children, and I get very different things from my relationships with my 3 children. And I give different things. I experience different things with each of them. So what do we need from our relationships? Well, we need a lot of things. Somewhere in that convoy, we need people that are reliable attachment figures. These are the people that we do have on our list, for short list for being called if something happens in our lives. These are the people that we could ask to drive across town to check and see if we turned off the pot on the stove, and we would feel comfortable doing that. These are the people that kind of make us feel safe in the world. You know, our earliest attachment figures are with our parents, but in adulthood, we still need attachment figures. Turns out we also need a confidant or more. The research suggests that in our culture, in the US culture, most people turn to a woman as their confidant. Men turn to a woman and women turn to a woman. But it doesn't have to be. Just who is it that you can tell your concerns to, or your secrets in a way? With whom do you confess your fears or share your worries or your hopes or your dreams or your risks that you're afraid to maybe tell others? We also need companionship. We need people to do things with, to play, to share experiences, to see what we see, to look at what we look at, but with a different eye. Just people to hang with. We need mentors, people that help us find our way. As I get closer and closer to retirement, I can't tell you how many times I initiate the conversation with people who are already retired to find out what that pathway has been for them. So I'm looking for mentors when I do that. Or I'm looking for mentors if I want to try out a new experience and I'm not sure how to be a newbie trying out this new experience. I look for a mentor. Service recipients. Most of us need some people we give to. People who are recipients of our care and our effort. We feel good when we give to others. And we also look to relationships for a shared history. Many of you probably are like me, where you have relationships now of 50 years or 60 years. My father's still living. He turns 98 next week. And my oldest sister and my older brother, the two of them have known me my whole life. I am very blessed to be in my mid-60s and have people that have known me my whole life still available. Some of you don't have that. And then how do you put together a shared history? Maybe it's with the friend from first grade that you haven't seen for 30 years, or maybe it's with a cousin or with a neighbor, or maybe you are the sole holder of your history now. With whom do you want to share that? So when we think about the riches we get from relationships, there are lots of different riches that come from different people who serve different functions in our lives. Rarely can one person serve all of the functions. So you might ask in your life, who makes you feel safe? Who gets you hungry for excitement? Who gets you moving? Who touches your heart? Who reaches out to you in times of need? Get you thinking. These are relationship riches that are sitting out there for you to develop at any point in the lifespan. And retirement is a time when many people look to having a little bit more time and discretionary energy to put toward that. So I invite you to think about that. So relationships. So again, now, in which relationships do you meet your social needs? So if we think back to that convoy that you created, you could circle the relationships on that you jotted down that you'd like to strengthen. Or you might note there are gaps that you want to fill. I have met a number of people that have very close people and they have distant people, but they don't have very much in the middle. So how would you pull more distant people in so that you get to know them better? Or how would you replace people who are in the middle, who are your very closest, who may die or move away or become very infirmed? And obviously you can't replace a 60 or 70-year relationship, but you can replace some of the functions of that relationship if you pay attention to what was the meaning and purpose you gained from those individuals. So let's talk about this sense of meaning and purpose a little more directly. Now, Simone de Beauvoir was one of the early people to write about aging. And I find this quote important. Retirement can be looked upon either as a prolonged holiday or as a rejection of being thrown to the scrap heap. I run into people who feel very much pushed aside as they retire and age. And I have to say, our society doesn't do a great job of creating pathways for us in later life to find our way into filling the gaps that we've identified. We have to do a little more work on that. So one can feel rejected, like I got pushed out the door. You know, many Northern European countries have a date when you turn 65, and that's it. You are forced into retirement. You don't have a choice about it. I have colleagues who've been professors and they're highly prolific, but they are forced into retirement on the day they turn 65 in some countries. Can they pick up and find a different way to do work? Yes. But there's a bit of rejection and being forced out. On the other hand, you can look at retirement as a holiday where you get to pick what you do. You get to choose. So that leads me to ask the question, when do you feel most like you? If this is kind of an extended holiday of discretionary time, it might be nice to think about, when are you most yourself? Is it when you're padding around in your pajamas reading a favorite novel that you just got from the library? Is it when you are out picking up trash off the side of the highway as a part of a group? Is it when you're singing in the choir? Is it when you go to a play? Is it, what is it that makes you feel most like you? Maya Angelou's famous line, a bird doesn't sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song. So much of adulthood, we've been problem solving. We've been looking for answers that we could plug in and help solve. This quote invites us to think about, what's the song that's within us? What's just innate to us? And if we don't know what that is, wow, is this a cool time to pay attention to it? So maybe we want to connect with a new activity. I have an image here of George W. Bush, former president, painting, and has become quite known for painting. Or maybe an old activity in a new way. And here's a retired teacher who chooses after retirement to go back and read with children. Lots of possibilities for your song to get out there. Now, if you want to ask the question, how can I meaningfully give of myself? You might want to think about what your values are. What is most important to you in the world? And what are your sources of joy? And in the intersection of those circles sits some ideas just waiting to happen about ways you can share those sources of joy and those values with others. So if you think about your roots, what values keep you grounded? Or the fruits of your tree, how much of yourself can you give and be healthy and happy. And what's going to feed you as you do that? What feeds your soul? Or in this image, what feeds your tree? What's the sunshine, the water, the rain? Winston Churchill always emphasized the role of service. You know, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give, which is not unlike Mahatma Gandhi's statement. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to others. Now, I know there are people on this webinar workshop who have given and given sometimes when you were depleted, and you're looking to retirement as a time to regroup. And this isn't a time just to shift from one kind of giving to an immediate other kind of giving. You may want to set a moratorium of a year or two where you don't join anything and you don't invest in anything, because you really need to feed your soul so that you can figure out where you want to give. But in the big picture, most of us are going to feel most content if there's some way in which our song is being useful to others. So sitting still for just a moment here, then reflecting just a little bit, what riches do you have in your life? And is there anything you want to add? Once you're clear about those, you'll know what you want to give. So the last big domain I want to talk about a little bit is how you maintain health in later life. This wellness wheel, there are various versions of it that have been around for a long time. This is one that I've seen and had shared with me in the field of gerontology. If you think about wellness just in terms of physical wellness, that's a pretty narrow view. But this wheel invites you to think about wellness in terms of emotional as well as physical and even vocational. You know, retirement is a time we switch from vocation or career into more discretionary time often. So what's the vocational wellness? I need to be doing something to be well. Social wellness, spiritual wellness, intellectual wellness. So if you had this wheel in front of you, and you can draw it on your little piece of paper if you want to, I would invite you to draw a line from the center, choose a place between the center and the outer circle of this wheel in each of those domains to say, here's where I'm at today. So maybe on emotional wellness, you're doing great and you'd be out at the outer edge of that circle. Whereas in physical wellness, you've got some challenges. So you might be in the middle of that pie shaped, you draw a line in the middle of that pie, piece of the pie. In vocational, maybe you are overwhelmed right now because you're still working and you've got a lot going on. You've got good vocational wellness. You're engaged well and you like what you do. But socially, maybe you've got some issues. It isn't quite perfect. If you draw those lines all the way around this wheel, you end up like, if you're like most people, with a kind of wobbly wheel. It's no longer perfectly round. There are dimensions of wellness in which you're doing very well. And there are dimensions of wellness in which you are lacking. Either you're experiencing illness or not wellness, or you just aren't thriving. You're just so-so. And your wheel, if it was trying to roll down the street, would be a little wobbly. And that could be a time, that could be a way to imagine, well, here's where I want to put some energy as I move into retirement. I want to even out my wheel a little bit. You might even it out in any of those dimensions. It might be physical wellness, it might be cognitive, it might be social, it might be a sport that does multiples of those. The new pickleball rage is one of those that has a social component and a physical component. It actually has a cognitive component if you're new to the game and you're learning the rules and you're learning how to do the game. So you can think of your own wellness wheel and think of retirement as a time that you can fuel yourself to meet your own sense of meaning and purpose by caring for the areas of your wellness that have not gotten all of the attention they deserve. So my point here is that as you think about retirement, you might want to think backwards to where you've been, and you might want to think about some new possibilities that you could engage in. I love Robert Frost's statement, "The afternoon knows what the morning never suspected." As I'm watching my children in young adulthood, I see that every day. There are things they just don't know yet are important, or how to value them or how to invest in them, that with time they will know. And with that brings us choice and opportunity. And Yeats' comment, "One loses as one grows older something of the lightness of one's dreams. One begins to take up life up in both hands and to care more for the fruit than the flower. And that is no great loss, perhaps." With age comes the opportunity for wisdom. It's definitely not inevitable. We have to work at it if we're going to be wise. But we can see things differently. We can pay attention a little less to the flash and glitz and a little more to the substance and the fruit. And when we do, that gives us opportunities for growth as well. So you could think of retirement as marking the end of working for someone else and the beginning of living for yourself. And if you think of it that way, then you have the possibility of investing and being way more reflective and investing in your own sense of meaning and purpose across those different domains of your life and those different aspects of your own wellness and those different aspects of possible meaning and purpose. So I always share at the end of this conversation some resources that I've found that I think are interesting. So there's this concept of human design that emerged a few years ago, well, probably almost 20 years ago now. And two of the leaders in that area from Stanford University are Bill Burnett and Dale Evans, who started really thinking about, we design engines, we design urban cities, we design streets, we design mechanical systems. You know what? What if humans a little more deliberately designed their own lives? And so they started developing, and well, they have developed and for decades now, offered a class to freshmen at Stanford called Design Your Life. And so then they published kind of a book guide for that and a workbook for that. Well, I picked it up a few years ago when I very first had the glimmer of retirement 10 years away. And I sort of wondered, how am I going to think about this? And I started using those workbooks to just structure my own reflection and my own thoughts about it. And I found them useful. So I share them with others. You can get them on Amazon. I get nothing from this. It's just they were useful to me. And so I just wanted to share that with you. So this is the point at which I am going to stop sharing my screen until such time as we need to go back to it if we do. And I want to invite up questions or comments or reflections or thoughts about what I've shared, arguments, like it doesn't work that way in my life. All of those are just fine. There may be questions in the chat room. I don't know. If there are, Pamela, can you let me know that?
Surely there are no questions at this point in time. There was reference made to where your handouts are on the website so that people can access those, even though they didn't get distributed prior to your session. They can access those now. So at this point in time, everybody is welcome to either unmute yourself or to put a question in the chat. And this is your unique opportunity to be able to talk directly with Dr. Qualls, and we would be happy to entertain them at this time.
Who's got a thought or a concern about retirement or a plan that you're wondering about?
Can you go back to that who gets you thinking, touches your heart, gets you moving, and makes you feel safe slide.
Sure. Give me just a second.
That was intriguing, and I just wanted to look at it again.
Give me just a second. I will get back there. What intrigued you about it?
Yeah. I just thought it was really made me think. I mean, I'm in semi-retirement. So yeah, I was going to jot some notes as I was looking at it, and I thought there was a couple of them I had missed. So
good. It is interesting to think about the fact that we can get sort of settled in certain relationships and not really wonder how they function for us. We also can lose a relationship that we think is irreplaceable, and in many ways it is irreplaceable, and yet some of the functions can be replaced, like we do when we move cross country and we pick up a new set of friends. Some of the functions that we had in our old long-term friendships are still there in the new ones. And sometimes we have to kind of look around to find the person that likes to read what we read, or likes to discuss what we discuss, or walk the way we walk. So yeah, good.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions or comments?
You know, Sarah, I think it's really easy if you've been in a job all your life, you've had a work environment that you've been, to use your word, structured in, that when you step out of that, if you haven't kept current with meaning and purpose, it can become a big void for people. And what do you suggest for people who have been in a work environment for so long, and now they're looking at making a change, but they're reluctant to do that because there's no bridge there. There's no bridge that would help them access to what is on the other side. Do you have any thoughts around that?
I do, actually. I have several thoughts, so let me just plow my way through them. One of my thoughts is that I think it's really prudent prior to retirement to allocate little bits of unscheduled time to pay attention to what you want to do. Now, many of us work in jobs that are kind of consuming, and when we get home, our first thought is just unwinding and relaxing and recouping. And so we may have trouble coming up with those times. But what if you set aside from 2 to 4 on Saturday afternoon and turned off the television and thought, what would I enjoy doing? What do I miss doing? What if I looked through magazines or meetup groups? Which ones draw my attention? I don't have to act on it. I just am investigating. I'm paying attention. So that's one thing that you can anticipate. Another thought is that the research, when I came into the field 40 years ago, a lot of life events were viewed as sort of troubling and problematic. Empty nest was a problem. Well, it turns out we did the research, actually empty nest isn't a problem. Most people are quite happy for their family to move along and give them some space. Is it an adjustment? Yes. And some people go faster through that adjustment than others, but it's not a problem. Well, the same thing's true with retirement. The people who struggle with retirement primarily are people who are forced into retirement against their wishes early by health problems. There's a small subset of people who I tease about failing retirement. We have a few of people in my world who have retired and they were just so antsy they couldn't stand the lack of structure, and they created a new structure. They kind of failed retirement and went back to work. But for most people, they find their way through it. And I'm talking large national studies that really the percent of people who have trouble really is quite small. So that leads me to think that it's probably prudent for most of us to take a little bit of time after retirement to breathe, just to sit still and breathe. And maybe we start by paying attention to our health and that wellness wheel. Where are some things I want to fill in gaps? And that may lead us down a path to exploring possibilities. But I will tell you that most people I talk to have sort of a, if only I'd had time, I would have ... list. Well, this is the time to pull it out and to explore it and just to wonder, is that really true? If I would have had time, I would have become a pilot. Is that really true? Or is that sort of a narrative I've carried that it's time to let go? Whereas if I had time, I would have taken cooking classes. Okay, maybe it's time to do that. Maybe it's time to try something. If I had had financial support, I would have been a race car driver. I would have been a singer. I would have been a clothing designer, whatever it is. What's the interest behind that? And what could I do with that now? Maybe I don't have the speed to be a race car driver or the voice to be a concert singer. Okay, but what's the urge that's in that I could play with? What if I went down to the conservatory and I asked where older people fit into those classes? What if I went to the senior center and checked out what art classes they typically have? What they're having right now and what they typically have are different, but where could I play a little bit with my interests without feeling too vulnerable that I'm trying to jump into being an expert? And we've become experts in the way we've lived, in the domains of life we've lived in. Maybe we could play in an area where we're not an expert. Someone made the comment I see in the chat, it seems like reality gets in the way of designing my life. And boy, is that the truth. And reality, I've had my share of reality that got in the way of life, that's for sure. And all of us have. And so the question isn't, can I design? The question in my view is, what's the tiny thing that I can design? Sometimes it's choosing the flavor of tea I drink. Sometimes it is, if I turn off the television, what else could I do? Or if I'm going to walk 10 steps, which direction? Or if I'm going to sit and watch television, is it with stitchery or knitting in my hands or something else? If I'm going to talk to someone, who's it going to be? Designing your life doesn't have to be a big thing. It really resides in the small things, the small choices. And I think it's very helpful for us to look at the choices we can make. It's certainly reality to acknowledge the ones we can't. And it's helpful to look at the ones we can. Other
There was
thoughts or questions?
Somebody had indicated about volunteer opportunities in the chat that had given a website. Do you
Good.
have any other thoughts around volunteer opportunities or experiences in this area, in Colorado Springs, for example?
I've always wished we had a major office for volunteer coordination that we don't have. Pamela, you can design that before you get to retire from the AAA.
Thank you.
It's a big undertaking.
I volunteer at Westside Cares, which
Yeah.
is located on the west side on West Colorado Avenue. Christy Milligan is our CEO, and she is absolutely dynamite to work with. I mean, the whole environment there is absolutely amazing. And even as a volunteer, you're called a staff member, and your opinions and thoughts are as important as one of the paid staff, which they really don't have that many paid staff members. But not only do they have volunteers at the office, but then they have all their other satellite food pantries. So there's, just a huge, there's a variety of places that you can certainly volunteer there, and you feel so loved and welcomed and needed and embraced it's just heartwarming. I feel so much energy when I come away from there. I'm ready to come home and clean house. I mean, it's just amazing.
Wonderful. That's, and what a great story that contrasts with the fear that when I'm not working at paid employment, I won't be meaningful or I won't be valued. And you've got a great example. I certainly know lots of people who have volunteered in disabilities agencies or at Silver Key Senior Services, or I mean, there are a lot of care and share partners in housing. The reason I put up, I walked you through that, think about your values piece, is whatever you value most in life. If it's fishing, there are organizations that use volunteers to protect waterways. You just sort of have to walk through finding your values, and then you start to pay attention to who's doing work in that area that I could join as an unpaid staff, and how much time do I want to put in, and what resources can I bring, what skills and do I want to bring. Great. Well, I've enjoyed being with you today, and I hope I've just helped you start a conversation with yourself. That's the intent of this, is truly to be a workshop to get you thinking about and reflecting on what your own experiences are and your own expectations are and your own desires are and your values, and therefore what your opportunities are for creating meaning and purpose in retirement. So thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to give any last minute comments or questions for Dr. Qualls? This certainly has been a very stimulating workshop, because it behooves, I think, all of us to look at wherever we are on this retirement grid, whether we're near it or we're not, we're further out on the scale. I think it behooves us all to really take a look at what is meaning and purpose, and what is it that I would enjoy doing, and what is it that I think a lot about, or that I would prefer doing if I had the time. So thank you, Dr. Qualls, for that. I think that's very, very important. So unless there's any other comments or questions, just a reminder that you will get a survey tomorrow morning. And that card, by the way, that I couldn't think of earlier, is a $50 card from Amazon, a gift card. And we've done that, and Credit Union has done that for each one of our 5 sessions, for both the fall and the spring session, actually. So please give us your feedback about today's session and sign up for the drawing with the card, with the gift card from Amazon. We'd love to hear your comments and your questions. And if something came out of today, or you have some other topics that you feel that are of interest, please indicate that on the survey form, because we look to continue this, the retirement series, and we look to continue to expand and put in different topics that people are really wanting to hear about. So thank you all for being here. It's been our absolute pleasure to be with you these sessions, to give you information that hopefully is helpful in your life, is stimulating, and will help you on your road to your future or to right now. Did you want to say anything, Blake, about the participation with the credit union, or just anything, final words before we leave?
I guess my only final words would be, again, thank you for all being here. This is obviously an important topic. This is something that I find fascinating myself. And really, if anyone has any questions about ENT or anything like that, please reach out to Pamela, or you can reach out to myself. Or just go to your nearest ENT service center to have any of your ENT questions answered. But thank you again for all being here.
All right, folks, have a good evening. Be well, and we look forward. Stay tuned to our website, please. We're planning for 2022. Stay tuned to our website for all the different webinars that we have. Take care and good night.